This morning, more pressure on Prince Andrew as an American judge rules he must be questioned under oath by Virginia Giuffre's lawyers by the middle of July next year. Could it clash with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June? Plus, another day, another handout. Now it's public sector workers in line for a pay rise. We'll ask the Business Minister, Paul Scully, about that and how it's going to be funded in just a few moments' time. Also ahead, All for One, we'll meet the mum who decided a tattoo was better than reconstructive surgery after a mastectomy, and now her daughters are supporting her with the same design. There you go. In addition to that, even Rick Astley will recognise that. It's Greta Thunberg, as you've never seen her before, relaxed, laughing and loving the limelight at the Climate Live gig. We'll meet the organiser who's putting on similar concerts right around the world. It's Tuesday, the 26th of October. A US judge rules Prince Andrew must be questioned under oath in the Virginia Giuffre sexual assault case by mid-July next year. Ending the freeze, more than 5 million public sector workers are in line for a pay increase in the latest giveaway revealed by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak.
They need to say, we're going to pay public sector staff and all workers in the economy a decent wage next year.
Good morning from Heathrow, where the latest figures show just how much air traffic has picked up in the third quarter.
An abuse of power, a big rise in the number of police officers flouting their position for sexual purposes, as the victim tells us action is overdue.
If they break the law, then surely there should be, absolute zero tolerance policy. Far too many police officers that have done something wrong, it's all swept under the carpet.
Dirty data, how unwanted digital photos are clogging up storage sites and causing hundreds of tonnes of carbon emissions. Overnight, a judge in the United States has ruled that Prince Andrew must answer questions under oath by the middle of July next year in the sexual assault case being brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. The Duke of York will need to be available to give evidence in the civil case by the 14th of July in an order agreed to by his and also Miss Giuffre's lawyers. She alleges that the prince forced her to have sex with him on more than one occasion, including around 20 years ago at the London home of Ghislaine Maxwell, an associate of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. There's a chance any questioning could clash with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations taking place next June. Prince Andrew has not been charged with a crime and denies any wrongdoing. We'll be speaking to the legal expert Joshua Rosenberg in just a few moments' time. Also still to come on the programme for you, 7:30, we are joined by Dr David Nabarro from the World Health Organization to examine the global handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Do the police have a sexual abuse problem? We'll be asking the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Met, Stephen Roberts, as new figures reveal a sharp rise in officers and staff facing action for sex abuse allegations. We'll be getting the thoughts from the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, on government plans to increase public sector pay. That's at 8:05. Also this morning, another day, another announcement, and it's still not even budget day yet. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay increase as the Chancellor Rishi Sunak confirms he's scrapping the year-long pay freeze. Public sector average weekly earnings rose by 4.5% in the financial year to April. Pay increases for the sector were frozen for 21-22, with the exception of the NHS and workers earning less than £24,000. There are almost 5.7 million public sector workers in the UK who will now be hoping for a pay rise. We've spoken to a range of people about this during our Great Debate programme last night, to those struggling to manage and to the union representing public sector workers.
The government needs to make a commitment, not just some vague statements in the budget. They need to say, we're going to pay public sector staff and all workers in the economy a decent wage next year, recognise that this has been a tough 18 months and that therefore we want to boost the economy. We want that high wage, we want that high productivity economy, and we want to ensure that public sector workers are part of that process.
Let's say, who amongst our viewers panel think that it is right and we can afford that 6.6% increase? Can I see those who think it is right and we should afford it? Well, we're pretty clear. We think he can and we should.
More on that to come with the Minister very shortly. But first, the number of police officers and staff being disciplined after abusing their position for sexual purposes has risen sharply in the last 3 years. It comes as the fallout from the murder of Sarah Everard at the hands of a serving police officer continues. Emma Birchley reports.
The horror of Sarah Everard's final hours prompted an outpouring of grief. But it was the fact that the man responsible was a serving police officer which added to the disbelief at her fate. Wayne Couzens pretended to be on duty when he kidnapped the 33-year-old before raping and then murdering her earlier this year. His case is extreme, but he's not alone in abusing a position of trust for sexual gain, and the number of cases being reported has soared. The abuse of position for a sexual purpose currently makes up nearly 60% of investigations by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. From 2018 to 2021, 66 officers and members of police staff faced disciplinary proceedings as a result, 42 of those in the past year. In 63 cases, misconduct was proven, with 6 people convicted of crimes.
Those figures have gone up because it's become a mandatory referral, so people have to refer it to us now. But we would hope that also it reflects a increased awareness where we are seeing fellow officers, for example, reporting people that they believe might be doing that, and those are being referred to us as well.
It hasn't reassured former animal rights activist Jessica, who was unaware her partner of a year back in the 90s was an undercover officer.
If they break the law, then surely there should be, absolute zero tolerance policy. And, it needs, again, it's the transparency. Far too many police officers that have done something wrong, it's all swept under the carpet. There's the sort of the policy of, the old boys club.
The organisers of the vigil held after Sarah Everard's murder also want more to be done.
If we are only measuring instances of harassment and violence, we're missing all of the warning signs of misogyny. This report from the IOPC talks about sexual offences where an officer abuses their power. Well, that's the worst case scenario. Before that point, that officer has probably done things which make women uncomfortable. Wayne Couzens' nickname was the rapist.
The IOPC is clear that those who abuse their position for sexual gain will be found out. But there's work to be done to rebuild trust in those whose role should be to protect. Emma Birchley, Sky News.
Let's talk about public sector pay, should we, and the minimum wage ahead of the budget tomorrow. Hello, Paul Scully is here with us, the Business Minister. Hello to you, thanks for joining us on the programme. It's always great to see you. Rishi Sunak said, last November, I think I'm right in saying, that he couldn't justify a public sector pay increase. What has changed in the last 12 months?
I think we've, it's given us the gap to allow for the public sector finances public finances to be looked at in the whole. Now we've got a better picture of where we are in terms of the recovery, having put £352 billion worth of support into protecting jobs and livelihoods. He now has that better picture to look forward and make sure that having had the public sector pay gone up previously ahead of private sector pay, it started to equalise, and now he can give all of those public sector workers who do an amazing job a pay rise.
How much?
Well, that will be determined by the pay review body. So each, the nurses have their pay review bodies, police, etc. They each have their individual pay review bodies who will report back to him. But I think what it does...
You don't always take notice of those, do you?
Well, it gives them a signal. It gives them a signal that the Chancellor is, is keen to give people a rise, so they will then take that into account as they look for to what should be an appropriate rise for public sector given the public finances as well, they can report back and the Chancellor...
But you don't always take notice of what they say, do you?
We tend to, we try to. We try to, but it's a review body. We look to them to provide us evidence, and then we'll make our decision. But we tend to keep as aligned as possible. But as I say, the Chancellor has signalled that very clearly, and so when we will look favourably when the pay review bodies report to make sure we get that pay rise.
Let's look at it in a different way then. Inflation could hit 4% this year, so they're going to get at least that.
I think it's, well, look, I can't tell you, because as I say, that's exactly
otherwise
what...
it's a pay cut,
well, that's what the pay review bodies will do. I mean, I can't preempt what they're going to do. I can't preempt what the Chancellor's going to say.
But you said now's the time to give them a pay rise. And inflation could hit 4%, so unless it's more than 4%, it's a pay cut.
Well, look, I think, as I say, we will see where we are come next April, when the review bodies have paid. What we've done, though, have reported, what we've done in the just yesterday, the Chancellor and the Treasury were announcing the national living wage increase of 6.6%. So I think that is a generous but balanced approach to the lowest paid in our society to make sure that businesses can still recover.
Generous but balanced, but it doesn't come anywhere near the cut in universal credit of £1,000.
It's a gross increase of £1,000 a year, and what we're doing is 6%. Well, that depends on the circumstance of the person and how many hours they're working.
Let me help you out. IFS Paul Johnson, director of, says it's about 250 quid.
It depends on how many hours those people are working. So you know, he's made one assumption. He's made one assumption, but it will literally depend on some people maybe part-time on that, some people full-time, some people and how many hours.
So some people it'll be 250.
Nonetheless, it's what you've got to look at. 6.6% is something that it continues our reach to making sure that the national living wage by 2024 is 2/3 of average median wage, so ending low pay, but not stifling the growth and the recovery of businesses that are paying that living wage, because we want to make sure that, as I say, we can balance it between employers and those workers that really need that money.
You're talking about businesses. Let's look at business rates then. Should we? Where are we as far as that is concerned? Tinkering around the edges again is what I read an article this morning in Business Leader saying that 15,000 outlets have gone, and tens of thousands of jobs have been lost directly as a result of you not sorting out business rates.
I'm not sure where the tinkering around comes, though. You'll have to wait for the fundamental business rates review, which has been taken into account
it into the long grass 4 times already.
Well, it's due to report this autumn. And I say,
is it going to definitely?
Well, that is, again, it sits with Treasury, so we'll see what the Chancellor says on Wednesday, if he has any indication about that. But I'm the hospitality minister and the retail minister, so clearly I hear from those businesses who are on the high street, who are most affected by business rates, about their concerns, which I've reflected to Treasury. But as I say, the word is fundamental. We do know that business rates needs to adapt to the 21st century to make sure that we get the balance right between high street bricks and mortar and online shops, and that will be taken into account.
OK, so just to clarify, it's been batted away 4 times. You still can't tell me whether it's going to be looked at this autumn. Inflation is going to be 4%, but you can't tell me whether a pay rise is going to be more than that for public sector workers. And as far as universal credit is concerned, that was £1,000 that's been cut, and some people might only get $250 despite the national living wage. Is that what we're saying?
Well, look, let's take that last one.
Let's take all of them.
Well, OK, fine, but I can go through all of them. You know, pay review, as I said, the bodies need to report before we
but it could be a pay cut. You acknowledge that it could be a pay cut.
Well, it could be anything. We need to see. Well, it could be anything. We need to see what the pay review bodies say. Well, it could literally.
It literally couldn't be.
It's the pay review bodies.
4% is what inflation is going to be. Unless it's higher than 4%, it's going to be a pay cut.
First of all, you're making the assumption about inflation. Let's see where we get to that.
If inflation is 4%, it needs to be higher than 4%.
We're also making a review.
Do you acknowledge that?
We're also making an assumption on what the pay review bodies say. Let's see what the pay review bodies say. But what the Chancellor has done, he's indicated that he wants to make sure that he can give the public sector
higher than the rate of inflation,
he can end the freeze. He's going to end the freeze.
I'm not very good at maths, but I've figured that one out.
No, yeah, but this is all speculation. What I'm saying is that the Chancellor...
let's not say 4% then. Let's say whatever the rate of inflation is, unless the pay review body comes in with higher, it's going to be a pay cut, isn't it?
So, well, that's just basic maths. But let's see.
Right,
but let's just see what the pay review body says in the first place.
Let's talk again about the national living wage then, because
as I said, the director of the IFS, Paul Johnson, says that to some people, the new figures will mean that they're taking home an extra £250 and they're losing £1,000 with universal credit. So that's also a pay cut.
But you are, again, first of all, you're only taking one thing there, because for the people that are, I talked about the fact that £200 depends on what the £250 depends on what their circumstances are, how many hours they're working.
But you acknowledge that some people will be impacted
but then on top of that, for the lowest paid, we have the household fund that was announced by the Chancellor that is being delivered by local authorities to those most at need. We have the energy price cap. We have the increased free childcare allowances that we've built up over the last few years. All of these things have a suite of measures to help the people most in need. So just taking that one emergency measure, the universal credit uplift that came to the end as the emergency started to recede. Well, it's reversed, basically. But nonetheless, as I say, that was then replaced by a £500 million household fund to target it at those most in need, because we've talked about the fact that the national living wage...
So you're saying that people are going to be better off next year?
What I'm saying is that we are increasing, but for the most vulnerable, the lowest paid in society, their living wage by 6.6%. What we don't want to do is build a recovery based on the backs of those people that are lowest paid in our society. So getting that balance right to make sure that we don't stifle the recovery by choking businesses. So
you're saying people are going to be better off next year?
What I'm saying is that they're going to get 6.6% pay rise. Well, I can't make those assumptions in terms of inflation and other costs at this moment in time. What I am going to say is their pay packets are going to go up by 6.6% if they're on the national living wage at the moment.
OK. The Leader of the House of Commons, the Speaker, I should say, very cross with the Chancellor, saying, what about all these leaks in the budget? Why am I not hearing about this in the Chamber for the first time tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I'm sure the Chancellor will answer that, but I think it's important that that people know these concerns, have a chance to digest them, to debate them, to talk about them over the last few days, as they clearly have done.
So you're casting out for people's opinion?
No, I think it's no, because the announcement's there. The announcement's been made. What I'm saying is that I think it's important for people like yourself to actually be able to discuss that with me.
Is this the way we're going to do it going forward?
Others. Well, I'm not the Chancellor, so I don't know. Is the honest answer.
Do you think it's a good idea?
I'm just telling. I think having the discussion about these sort of things, making sure that the people on the national living wage, for example, don't miss out on seeing some of the detail because it's lost in a massive budget document.
Oh, I'm sure they know if they're struggling with the pay packet.
Absolutely. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. But they will also see some of the other things. They will see some of the other things that are available to them as well that sometimes get lost.
Will you be wearing a mask for the budget?
I'm not sure if I'm in the chamber for the budget.
If you are?
But it depends on how crowded it is.
It's going to be packed.
Yeah, in that case, which is why I might not be in the chamber, because I've got.
And if you are, and it's packed, will you be wearing
if it's absolutely where I have been in a room or an area where it has been absolutely rammed, then I wear a mask. I wear a mask in the cab on the way here. I wear a mask on the tube, on the trains.
Because all your colleagues don't tend to, or many of your colleagues don't tend to, do they?
I think the signal is for people to, we've been locked down for 18 months and the government have been telling people what to do for 18 months. What we have said to people now, use your common sense, use your own initiatives, make your own informed decisions. We know that we're living with COVID. And so that this doesn't just suddenly go away overnight. So it's really important that we allow people to make those informed decisions and be respectful for other people as well around them.
It's going to look a bit weird, isn't it, when all the Labour benches have all got their masks on and lots of the Tory benches don't. Sending a mixed message, isn't it, to the public, as usual?
I think the message is that, as I say, make your decisions for yourselves.
OK, but you accept that it's mixed messages if half the House has got masks on and the other hasn't?
It depends where you want to go to. If you want government to be dictating to you every minute of the day, that's one thing.
Is it a mixed message?
It's a message that you can use your own use your own initiative, make your own decisions.
Good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on the programme. Thank you. And a reminder, we'll have live coverage of the budget here on Sky News tomorrow, of course. And just a reminder, if you want to catch up on any of that interview or watch the programme when you are out and about this morning, then you can absolutely do that as well online. The mobile app You can go to our website as well and go into our live blog to watch the programme, and you can catch up on the interviews on my Twitter as well, if you would like to. That's @KBurley. In other news, the judge in the United States has ruled that Prince Andrew must answer questions under oath by the middle of July next year in the sexual assault case being brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. Prince Andrew has not been charged with a crime and denies all wrongdoing. So what is going on this time? The legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg is with us. Hi, Joshua. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What's happened this time? This news is broken overnight. Where does this leave Prince Andrew this morning?
This turns out to be an agreed schedule, agreed between the lawyers for Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre. And the district judge in Manhattan, Lewis Kaplan, has set the deadline to complete the written evidence which both sides are apparently going to give. These are called depositions. This is evidence given under oath, but not in court, usually in a lawyer's office with the other side's lawyers present. And so what the judge is doing is making it clear that this can't drift on. He's not prepared to leave it up to the parties to decide how long this should take. There has to be a fixed point by which the evidence needs to be in. But he's been pretty generous. It's well over 6 months, so plenty of time for both sides to give their evidence if that's what they're going to do.
OK, so we could find ourselves, or he could find himself in a position where he's having to face these allegations via the lawyers very close to the Queen's Jubilee celebrations. Will we find ourselves in that position?
That is certainly the concern that's been expressed this morning, but there's no reason why this has to go up to the wire. If Prince Andrew is going to give evidence, he can do so at any reasonable time between now and the middle of next July. And even if it was to be next July, it wouldn't necessarily be public. As I say, this is evidence behind closed doors. It's not a court hearing. You've really got three choices if you're in Prince Andrew's position. You can, first of all, ignore the whole proceedings. Well, he's clearly not going to do that. If you ignore it, then the judge will find against you. And then there's a question of how a damages award in favour of Virginia Giuffre could be enforced against Prince Andrew. Well, that's not going to happen. Clearly, the other possibility is to fight it, and we don't know whether he's going to do that. And the third possibility is to settle. And all these options are open to him. We don't yet know how he's going to handle this. There's talk about suggesting that Virginia Giuffre had promised that she wouldn't sue anybody else. She'd reached a settlement with other people. We don't know the details of that. What we do know is that the case is being proceeded with, and we may not hear for quite some time whether it's actually going to fight or be settled.
OK, so just give us the setting of how he's actually going to have this chat.
The idea is, and this is something which is used readily in the United States, not so much in the United Kingdom, is that you go into a lawyer's office. Now, I'm not suggesting that Prince Andrew would necessarily go to the United States to do this. Arrangements could no doubt be made for it to be done in the United Kingdom, if he's willing to do so. He could say, I've got nothing to say, and therefore there's no point, or he could just send in a written statement. If he wants to fight this, well, obviously, it helps him if he gives evidence and he makes himself available for questioning by Virginia Giuffre's lawyers. So he would simply be asked questions by a lawyer. The proceedings would be video recorded, they'd be transcribed, they'd be used in evidence when the case finally comes to court, if it's not settled in the meantime. OK. Fascinating stuff, Joshua. Thanks so much indeed for explaining that to us. Always appreciated. Thank you.
In other news, Australia has pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, said he would take the commitment into discussions at the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, which kicks off this weekend.
We know we can't let the changes that are happening around the world just happen to Australia. We know we can't pretend it's not happening, the changes that are occurring around the world, just as we haven't been pretending in the actions that both the government has been taking and, most importantly, Australians have been taking.
Looking at the impact of climate change on the planet, here is our climate dashboard for you. 46
percent of real-time power at the moment is fossil fuels. Below that, you can see global warming since 1880 up 1.23 degrees. According to some, the time left to stop us reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius above those 1880 figures is 11 years. And you can see the bottom figure, the scary figure at the bottom, that is total carbon dioxide emissions in millions of tonnes. And a reminder that you can get all the latest stories about climate change on the Sky News Daily Climate Show, which airs every weekday evening at 6:30 p.m. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner has apologised to the family of two murdered sisters for the way it handled their missing persons report. It follows an investigation by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which found the police response to the disappearance of Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry was unacceptable. In a statement, the Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, says, while we now know that very sadly Nicola and Biba had been murdered in the early hours of Saturday, the 6th of June 2020, before they were reported missing, if we had been responding better, we may have saved their friends and family immeasurable pain. Police and emergency services are attending the scene at the Home Office after protesters from Animal Rebellion scaled the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs building in Westminster next to the Home Office. The group, which is an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, is demanding government support for a plant-based food system at COP26. Founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has defended his company after strong criticism from a former worker who's accused the social media giant of making online hate worse. Francis Horgan warned of more violent unrest like the Capitol Hill riots if the Facebook algorithms continue to push divisive content. Mr. Zuckerberg said the company had to balance difficult social values. Britney Spears has accused her family of hurting her deeper than you will ever know. Posting on Instagram, she said she had been let down by those close to her and that she'll fight for justice, even if her conservatorship comes to an end. The pop star's life and career have been controlled by the legal arrangements since 2008. Heathrow's traffic figures for the third quarter of this year have just been released, covering the period when more travel restrictions were eased. What do they say? Let's find out. Aisha's standing by at Heathrow for us. Hi, Aisha. What are they saying?
Morning, Kay. Well, we definitely have some positive figures on our hands here. The data shows that in the third quarter, Heathrow experienced its first full quarter of passenger growth since 2019. Passenger numbers recovered to 28% of pre-pandemic levels. And that really just highlights how much pent-up demand there was, because that third quarter, of course, covers the summer period, people heading out on summer holidays when we did see those restrictions easing with people who were fully vaccinated no longer having to isolate when returning from amber list countries, and also there were simplifications to the tests needed as well. So it really just does highlight how much demand there was, but how much restrictions were standing in the way. But there is still a very long way to go. Heathrow say they don't expect air traffic to fully recover until 2026. Their chief executive, John Holland-Kaye, said that they are very much on the cusp of a recovery, but like I said, a long way to go. In total, they've lost so far £3.4 billion as a result of the pandemic.
OK, Aisha, thanks very much indeed for the update. Speaking to John Holland-Kaye, who is the chief exec of Heathrow, very shortly here on the programme. Quick look at the weather for you now. In for a pretty mild few days with showers or more prolonged rain running in on a west to southwesterly wind. Now, take a look at this. A man who likes to make a statement. An Italian land artist has unveiled his latest piece dedicated to the COP26 climate summit. Impressive, huh? The giant art piece was created on a 26,000 square metre plot of land near Verona with a tractor, plough and rotating harrow, apparently, without the use of any tracing on the ground. Most impressive. The artist says our world is the most beautiful art form we have, and it's worth fighting to make it a better place for all. Coming up, we're joined by Dr. David Nabarro from the World Health Organization, looking at the next stages of the pandemic. That to come. Now, the Business Minister has refused to say whether public sector workers are likely to be better off when their pay settlement is decided. Millions of workers, including police officers, teachers and the armed forces, are in line for a pay increase, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak confirming he's scrapping the year-long pay freeze. Pay bodies will recommend an increase, but the decision on any pay rise will rest with the government.
The pay review, as I said, the bodies need to report before we
but it could be a pay cut. You acknowledge that it could be a pay cut.
Well, it could be anything. We need to see.
4%.
Well, it could be anything. We need to see what the pay review bodies say. Well, it could literally.
I mean, it literally couldn't be.
It's
anything.
the pay review bodies.
4% is what inflation's going to be, unless it's higher than 4%. It's going to be a pay cut.
First of all, you're making the assumption about inflation. Let's see where we get to that.
If inflation is 4%, it needs to be higher than 4%.
We're also making a review.
Do you acknowledge
We're also
that?
making an assumption on what the pay review bodies say. Let's see what the pay review bodies say. But what the Chancellor has done, he's indicated that he wants to make sure that he can give the public
higher
sector
than the rate of
that
inflation,
he can
it's a
end the
pay
freeze.
cut.
He's going to end the freeze.
I'm not very good at maths, but I've figured that one out.
No, yeah, but this is all speculation. What I'm saying is that
OK, let's not say 4% then. Let's say whatever the rate of inflation is, unless the pay review body comes in with higher, it's going to be a pay cut, isn't it?
So, well, that's just basic maths. But let's see.
Great.
But let's
as long as we've got that.
Let's just see.
It's just basic maths tomorrow.
It is, Kay. Two big announcements yesterday that he was on to talk about. The first one is on the national living wage. That's the minimum wage if you're aged over 23, going up to £9.50 an hour from next year. And the second one is about the public sector. Doctors, teachers, nurses, soldiers, they're all going to get a pay rise. We don't know how much yet, because how it works is that the pay review bodies have to have a look at it over a period of several months, and the government have to make the final decision, and that's going to happen next April as well. But good news for those 5.7 million public sector workers. But of course, the question is how much of it is going to get eaten up by tax rises, by the rising cost of living, by inflation, and by obviously people who are on universal credit are going to see some of that cut back. And it's interesting that the minister couldn't say whether people would end up being better off. Now, I have to say, it's not a surprise that the public sector are going to get a pay rise. Their pay was frozen last year, controversially, because they were told by the Chancellor, look, people in the private sector are losing their jobs. Now, in the private sector, things are looking a lot better. The Chancellor says the recovery is now on track. So this is not a surprise that they're going to get a pay rise. The question, of course, is how much will it be? He was right to say it depends how many hours you do, what benefits you're on, and so on. But we're hearing that with everything taken into account, it looks like people on the minimum wage will be about £250 better off.
OK, for now, tomorrow, thanks. Tomorrow's Take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it already. Thank you. Could wealthier countries be the ones to suffer from global vaccine inequality? At a virtual Institute for Government event, Dr. David Nabarro, friend of the programme, also of the World Health Organization, said the virus is a global challenge to keep out variants that could compromise the efficacy of the vaccine. And he joins us now. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. I suppose the message is nobody's safe unless we're all safe.
Absolutely. And everyone matters when it comes to pandemics. Just saying we'll look after the people inside our own country and not worry about the others will come back and hurt us all later. So I'm really, really pleased that you picked up that discussion we had yesterday. There are big, big summits coming up. There's the G20 this weekend. And of course, there's the climate event taking place in Glasgow in the next couple of weeks. I really hope that world leaders come out of this position of responding to the pandemic as primarily my country, my people, and we start to look at it as a world challenge. Otherwise, the future looks a little bit bleaker than it should be. And that's why I'm pushing so hard, Kay.
So what should the UK be doing with their excess vaccines?
Well, firstly, we have a global scheme. We set it up last year. It's working really well. It's just absolutely dry in terms of vaccines. So if any country has spares, give them to COVAX, the World Distribution System, and give them early. Don't give them 3 weeks or 4 weeks before they expire, because it creates incredible problems. Secondly, just defer. Don't receive your vaccines for 2 months and let the supplies go to poor countries and then start receiving them again. It's not going to have big problems, may postpone booster rollout very slightly. But the real thing is we just can't go on having rich countries creaming off the vaccine supply and stocking it in their own vaults. And then poor countries just have people dying. And that's why we're really pushing this very strongly right now.
That's why I was asking you about COVAX. Of course, many of us have heard of that already.
Yeah.
And the UK said they were going to send tens and tens and tens of millions. I think we're about 7% of what we promised at the moment. Letting the side down?
Well, I think so. You know, if we're going to actually help the world get itself sorted on this pandemic, we've got to have fair shares for everyone. And that's the right way to deal with a pandemic. The virus goes on changing, and if you don't get everybody working on it simultaneously, all sorts of nasty surprises that could happen. But that means acting now. It doesn't mean saying, well, we'll share the vaccines, but we'll share them next year. So everybody, you promise to do it now. Don't let the side down, Kay. You're absolutely right.
How are you feeling about mandatory vaccines for healthcare staff?
My own view is that if you have to mandate people to get vaccinated, that means that there's a breakdown in shared understanding and trust. I'm really working hard everywhere to see if we can get health workers and other essential workers agreeing to be vaccinated without it being a compulsion. I worry that if you start to compel, then that will provoke a reaction that's nothing to do with the vaccine, nothing to do with the pandemic, but to do with people's frustration at being instructed to do it, and otherwise they lose their jobs. So if at all possible, I say to everybody, do it by agreement, not by coercion.
That's a slight dodge there, Doctor. I'm going to have to come back to you on that one. What if they don't?
I know. Well, you know, my own view is that it's really, really difficult if people are forced to accept something done to their bodies in order to stay in a job. This is my personal view. It's been my view all my life. And so you're asking me, and I'm giving you that personal view. There is no WHO position on mandatory vaccines. It's up to each individual government and employer to work out how to do it. But in summary, I'm going to say to everybody who's with us today, we don't deal with this pandemic properly unless we can do it in partnership. The virus is the problem, people are the solution, and everything we can possibly do to get everyone on side so that we're all dealing with it together, that's what I'm after, and that's why I keep going with my dodges in answers to your questions.
The 6 months from the second booster to the second vaccination to the booster, should that be reduced to 5?
I don't want, again, to give a recommendation on the timing of that one. All I'm saying is boosters are going to be important for people who don't have strong immune systems. But at the same time, there's no absolute hard and fast rule for when the boosters should be given. But we do need to have booster programs being set up where there is vaccine available for those people who are most in need, especially those, as I say, whose immune systems are not working, or people who are older, or people who've got other conditions that put them at particular stress.
OK. Tomorrow is the budget here in the United Kingdom, and the House of Commons chamber will be absolutely chock-a-block. It does look as though half of the chamber, I'm not going to say politically, half the chamber will be wearing masks, the other half will not. Which side would you be on?
Well, everybody, can I just tell you something about this virus? It is absolutely unstoppable. It gets everywhere. And so we have to do everything we possibly can to stop it. And one of the best ways to stop it is a well-fitting surgical mask properly over your face, pushed in over your nose, covering everything. And that reduces the risk to others and the risk to you. Well, if it works, why on earth don't people use it? It's not a party political issue. This virus doesn't vote. And indeed, there's no difference in how you deal with the virus, whether you vote for this party or that party. So everybody, wear masks when you are in close confinement. It's the right, sensible, proper thing to do. And everybody should be doing it, including our leaders.
And what about jabs for 12 to 15-year-olds? Where are we on that?
Well, I think that more and more countries are realising that if they're going to go for a vaccine rollout, they will also have to vaccinate children. Some countries are vaccinating very young children. All I want to say is, if you're going to vaccinate children, it's fine to do that, do it in consultation. But please remember, by trying to increase the coverage of vaccines in wealthy countries, you are also running the risk of depriving poorer countries, and therefore the overall response gets a bit diminished. So I'm saying to everybody, as you involve children, please also remember there is the everyone matters issue. You've got to go on sharing vaccines widely as well.
We are out of time, but of course I'm not going to let you go until you tell me how the grandchildren are.
Well, so they are absolutely fabulous, and they tune in and they watch UK. And Otto, who is the one everybody who was born during lockdown and is now a thriving 1+-year-old, I sometimes think that he will grow up remembering that Kay Burley is the source of all good things. Thank you very much indeed for asking after him.
Otto, your granddad's on the telly. Hello, Otto. Good morning.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you. Thanks for joining us, Doctor. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. Have a lovely day,
Thanks
everybody.
a lot. Thank you. Now, it's being called dirty data, and it might force the nation's selfie takers to rethink their habits. New research suggests unwanted digital photos produce the same amount of carbon emissions as more than 100,000 return flights from London to Australia. Fraser Maud has more.
A picture may paint 1,000 words, but it might also be contributing to the climate crisis. A new survey is calling us out for what it calls our dirty data habits, storing millions of unnecessary photos and videos on servers around the world, creating a carbon footprint as big as the airline industries.
You don't tend to think about photos and data having that much of an impact on your carbon footprint. You tend to think of aviation, you tend to think of transport. Social snapping contributes to 350,000 tonnes of CO2. So put that into perspective, that's a lot of data that's contributing to a lot of CO2.
Rosie Okocha is what you might call a heavy user. As an online sustainable fashion advocate, she takes thousands of photos. But unlike many of us, she's well aware of their potential impact.
I take a lot of pictures just to share online how easy it is to sort of make a transition from fast fashion to slow fashion. And that means I'm taking hundreds of pictures of hundreds of outfits every day. I keep a lot of things on my hard drive anyway, and I think I'm definitely going to do move my content creation onto hard drives as much as I can instead of keeping it in the iCloud.
The report assumes that the average UK adult takes almost 900 photos a year. The duplicated and unwanted images left in storage accumulate over 10.5 kilos of CO2 emissions per person every year, the equivalent of over 112,000 return flights from London to Australia. So were these happy snappers in York aware of the potential damage their digital memories might be causing?
It's probably something so easy to delete all your pictures, but it's just something you keep them all. It's just habit.
It does have an impact. How much of an impact, I'm not sure.
Today, she can't use her phone because it's full, so she has to use my phone.
I've just been searching through. I've got a photo of my brother standing over there, but it's taken me 10 minutes to find it on my phone. So, yeah.
There's so many.
Because there's so many, so yeah, I need to get rid of a few.
And the way to do that is to delete duplicates, regularly clear out your cloud storage, delete old messages and emails, and whenever possible, simply turn your data-hungry devices off. Fraser Maud, Sky News, York.
Now, the number of police officers and staff being disciplined after abusing their position for sexual purposes has risen sharply in the last 3 years. It comes as the fallout from the murder of Sarah Everard at the hands of a serving police officer continues. Let's speak to the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Met, and that is Stephen Roberts. It's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Talk to us in a bit more detail, if you would, please, about what you think the public and, in particular, women, I suppose, would make of some of the figures that we're looking at today.
I think what these figures demonstrate is that the police service and its independent watchdog take this sort of shameful behaviour as seriously as the public have a right to expect. In many ways, I would be far more concerned if there weren't a rise in these sorts of prosecutions and if there weren't significant figures, because that would mean that nobody was looking, that nobody was dealing with a problem. It's so easy for a large organisation to put reputational damage ahead of making sure that its members apply proper standards of behaviour. We've seen how badly that can go wrong with the police service itself, with the Catholic Church, with all sorts of professions. What this is actually, odd as it may seem, it's good news. It's showing that this is being taken as seriously as it should be.
You say that, but looking, if you sort of burrow down into these figures a bit more, of the 52 staff who face gross misconduct proceedings in the period that we're talking about, 3 out of 4 of them are no longer serving, but 1 in 4 of them, 38, are still serving officers, and they face gross misconduct proceedings. That can't be right.
Well, we don't know what the facts of that particular case were. If they are in the report, I haven't had the chance to read them yet. But you must remember that it's not the police service itself that finally decides what penalty should be imposed. It's an independent board run by a legally qualified individual and a lay member of the public, plus a senior police officer. And it's that body that decides whether somebody should or shouldn't be dismissed for what they've done. And as with any crime, there is always a scale of seriousness from, I won't call it trivial, but from the lesser end up to the most serious sexual harassment, up to the most serious offences like rape. So I would expect...
What would you refer to as the lesser end of sexual offences?
I'm sorry, could you say...
What would you refer to as the lesser end of sexual offences, in your opinion?
I would refer to something like a police officer who has been to see a relatively vulnerable woman and who then calls her for no good policing reason, but simply because he wants to form a relationship with her. In my terms, that would be falling below the appropriate standard of behaviour. But I don't think that in itself would justify that officer being dismissed.
That could be terrifying for that woman who has called a police officer when she's at her most vulnerable.
Indeed, it could be. And I'm not minimising that. All I'm saying is that there is always a spectrum of seriousness in any offence, whether it's a police officer or any member of the public.
OK, good to talk to you today. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on the programme. Thank you.